Hey, it's Matthew Chapetta, pastor for GodView World Outreach. One thing that's talked about in scriptures, from when Jesus ascends to heaven until the end of the New Testament, is the Holy Spirit. Did you know there are over 100 references to the Holy Spirit in the epistles all the way till the end of the book of Revelation? The Spirit is a pretty powerful force that can literally change everything in our lives if we can just let it happen. So let's take a look at the disciples. They were with Jesus from the start of his ministry after the baptism till his death and resurrection. These 11 disciples had a very close encounter with the earthly manifestation of God. Now, if you can imagine what that would be like, it is pretty spectacular. I mean, for 3 years, these disciples ate, they slept, they watched incredible miracles happen all around them, and they got to literally hang out with God. They gave up their lives as fishermen, tax collectors, traders, carpenters, and the like to follow Jesus. To liken it to current day affairs, it would be like asking Steve Jobs in the height of his time over at Apple to give up his fortune, his goals, his dreams, and spend 3 years wandering the desert, meeting with people, watching miraculous things happen, and have dinner with some guy who claimed to be the Messiah. I don't profess to know what Mr. Jobs would have done, but it does sound a little crazy. The point is, though, for 3 years these disciples got to really know Jesus, some more than others. But then he dies and is resurrected and ascends into heaven, and now they're all tasked with this monumental idea of going out and building the church. They had no real formal training on what to do. It was kind of just sprung up upon them, and what a mighty task it must have seemed like. In Matthew 28, verses 16 through 20, it says, "Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age.'" That is a big job. If you notice in that verse, some of the 11 disciples even doubted that it was Jesus that appeared to them. But then Jesus came closer to them and told them in verse 19 to go make disciples of all nations. Up until this point, if you think about it, it had been Jesus making disciples. So you can imagine the shock and the awe of what Jesus was telling them to do in that moment. How are they going to accomplish this? There had to have been doubts in their minds. These were former fishermen and some local outcasts. They weren't mighty men in their communities. And so, to even identify that you're with Jesus at that time meant death, as evident in the fact that Peter denies Christ just merely a few weeks prior. So how is this supposed to be done by ordinary men? Notice what Jesus says to them though in verse 20. He says, "Surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." Well, how is that accomplished? Well, we all know that God has sent down a helper for us so they can act as an intermediary on our behalf. The Holy Spirit has power, very real power. In the book of Acts, the Spirit is portrayed as the source of spiritual power. The example is the ministry of Jesus was simply an example of ministry, and it was being led, orchestrated, and empowered by the Holy Spirit. Without the Spirit leading and empowering the church for growth, the early church would not have happened. The church's success is directly linked with its relation to the Holy Spirit. Well, since we're discussing this right now, we know that the Spirit is very much living and is still moving within us. It is still active. It still trains us. It still leads us to witness boldly on behalf of Jesus to our communities. It keeps us from dangers. It's our personal source of power within us so that we can accomplish the Father's mission and that we can still have a relationship with Him. We really need to realize the power that we have been given. Too often in modern churches today, we are so stuck to a program of how things are supposed to be that we often forget that we serve a powerful God who has given us, his believers, a spirit that has stood the test of time and continues to show up in our lives if we can just align ourselves to God's purpose instead of our own. We need to have that hunger for the Spirit and be so filled with the Spirit of God that we could literally change lives just like the apostles. If those ordinary men could continue a work that has lasted over 1,985 years, then I think we can at least begin with surrendering our own lives to God so that we can see the power of God and the Spirit work through us to our friends, our family, our neighbors, and even our local churches.